hello, and welcome to the Content Advantage. My name is Scott Abel, and I will be the host of today's show. With me, I have our special guest, John Horodyski. John, welcome. How are you today?
Good morning, Scott. Happy Tuesday. How are you?
I am super happy to be here. Thanks for joining us. I know it was this is a hot topic for lots of people, and you are very passionate about it. We've got lots to chit chat about during this time period. Let me tell the audience a few things about today's show while we're here. So first of all, today's show is being recorded, which means that anytime if you need to leave early, don't worry about it. You can come back and using the same URL you're using to watch today's live show to be able to watch a copy of the recording. You can also share that URL with other people who might like to see the show who didn't get a chance to watch today's live event. Also, we don't have access to your camera or microphone, so we can't see or hear you, so you don't have to worry about that. You can ask a question of John at any time by using the Ask a Question tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Clicking that opens up a little text-based window into which you can text a question. Just know that John and I cannot text you back, but we will be aware that your questions have been submitted, and we'll ask as many as possible and try to get answers for you with the time that we have available on today's show. You can also get additional content, including troubleshooting information in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel, which is right next to the Ask a Question button. Opening that little repository will give you access to troubleshooting information from BrightTalk about your audio and video challenges you might experience on today's show. It also has information from today's sponsor and information about our guest, so you can reach out to John and his company later to learn more about metadata and taxonomy, today's topics of today's show. And one more thing, let me tell you a little quick bit about our sponsor today. We like to make sure to give everybody a clue who's actually sponsoring today's show. Today's show is brought to you by ZoomIn Software. ZoomIn actually helps companies do something that a lot of folks don't recognize, and that is answer questions about products. Customers have product questions all the time, much more than you may think. And that's why ZoomIn makes a platform designed to help it make it easy for you to provide all of your information in one place in an intuitive interface with a data-driven customer experience where you can serve up the right piece of information to the right person at the right time in the right language and format and on the device of that consumer's choosing. You can learn more about their offerings on the web at zoominsoftware.com or in the attachments section of today's webinar viewing panel. All right, John, let me end the slides here and put us back on screen and say, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. For audience members who don't know who you are, what do you do for a living and who do you do it for?
I do. My name is John Horodyski, and thank you very much, Scott, for having me on the show today. Who am I? What do I do? I've been doing this type of great, good, fun, exciting work in metadata, taxonomy, digital asset management, marketing, governance, content strategy, all those good things with your content. I've been doing that for over 20 years now, work a lot with marketing directors, CMOs, digital directors. I've come to this space in a unique way. I come with the sort of the impetus of a data foundation. I come with 2 master's degrees, one in information science and one in archival studies. So I definitely have that sort of data-driven, library scientist sort of driven approach to this. And my clients range from CPG, retail, media and entertainment, pharma, insurance, basically industry agnostic, because everyone's got information problems. Everyone's got content strategy problems. Where is it? What is it? What do I do with it? How do I organize it? And that's where the metadata and the taxonomy come in. It's in the organization of that information. I also am quite a busy individual in terms of public speaking. Scott, you and I both share a similar passion in terms of speaking and meeting with people around the world. And I also do teach a graduate course at San Jose State University, where I'm teaching a course in digital asset management for over 15 years now. So I come to this with that sort of data-driven approach, and that's where I sort of have found the greatest success in discussing things like the metadata and the taxonomy. So that's
before we get started, because we've got so much to say in such a short amount of time, also tell our viewers very quickly that you've been working on a special project, your new book called Metadata Matters. Talk to us just briefly about that.
We will. So Metadata Matters, I have a book out a few years ago, but Metadata Matters is a new one coming out April 4th, Francis and Taylor, CRC Press. And the good thing, I'm going to share a slide here of the book so everyone
can
see the book. Metadata matters. Why? Why at this time? Well, metadata does matter for many good reasons. It gives structure and meaning to all the data associated with all that we do in our business and our personal transactions. Metadata is in business. It's in what we do in our personal lives. It tells you where your content came from, where's your content going to, and how your content can ultimately be used. And the way that I sort of structured this discussion was very much around that if data is the language upon which our modern society is being built and structured, then metadata is going to be that grammar. It's going to be the sort of the construction of its meaning and the ability to understand what the data can do for us all. And over my years in working with clients and listening to clients and seeing how their content is being used, it was the metadata. It's that data about data that really affected how they were able to make change for their content. It's in everything that we do. It's behind the scenes. It's in front of us. And it's very much around the idea that with metadata, we want our content to ultimately be discovered. We make things, we create things. Many people on the call today are probably in organizations where they do create content, whether it's for consumers in video or in imagery or sort of marketing collateral. We want that content to be found, but the way in which it can be found is with good metadata surrounding it. So it can be found and used and enjoyed. And that's the fun. That's kind of the real sort of the nature of how metadata can be a good thing for us all. Does that help, Scott?
Well, yeah, it does. But before we dive into what metadata is and what it's not, could you talk to us a little bit about why do we want to do this work? I mean, I think what you and I are arguing is that in order to have the capability to beat the competition, to meet sales goals, to grow your company at an exponential clip, for example, you need to be able to prepare all of your processes and be able to automate and streamline them so that you have capabilities that your competitors do not. And so are we really talking about developing capabilities with our content that allows our companies to do things with it that we might not ordinarily be able to do?
Yeah, the opportunity is literally right now. Here we are, 2022, talking about content. The opportunity for content owners, content creators, marketing technologists, marketing directors, although anyone who's managing content, we need to understand the value that metadata provides for that content so it can empower the work, whether it's from creation to discovery, all the way through the distribution channels. Metadata matters because it does define us at any point in a given time with the best information that is available to us by means of a foundation of data for content clarity. So yeah, it is strategic, it's creative, it's operational. We want those content capabilities because we want to know, who is this for? Who is the content being designed for? Who is your audience? How is it to be used? Where is it to be used? And when is it to be used? These are all capabilities that any organization is looking for strategically to say, how do I get that content out? How do I allow it to be used in the way that it was supposed to? And metadata is that foundation to allow it to be used in all those different stages where it's strategic, it's the creative side of it, and then also that operational side to get it being used and out the door of your organization. And in writing the book and working with clients over the years, there's many examples of how that content capabilities are so valued by our leaders in our organizations because they want that content, again, to be shared in such a way that it has meaning and it does get delivered to us at the right time, at the right place.
And in reality, they don't really care about the content. They care about the capability, right?
Yes,
the capability,
exactly.
It brings us the possibilities that we don't have without it. Could you then just kind of nail down just for a second, what is metadata and how does it differ from taxonomy?
Totally. Let's have some fun with some slides. Okay, this is what people think metadata is. This is fun. They think it's the matrix. They think it is these green lines of code that are scary. Not that. We think it is, and we all love the matrix for many different reasons, but it's not that, in fact. It's actually something as easy as a spreadsheet with little pieces of data. But the best example that I want to share that's probably very meaningful for a lot of people is, let's take a picture. That's my dog. That's Lola the Puggle. Let's look at some of the metadata. So what is metadata? It's just data about data. That's really it is, but it's actually more than just data about data. So let's look here at this. There's 3 different ways to use metadata. There's descriptive metadata, structural or sort of technical metadata, and then the administrative data. So let's look at this. The asset type, this is a photo. The campaign this was being used for was the Puggles campaign, of course. The talent, that is Lola the Puggle. The photographer was Tracy Falk. Structural metadata, that's that wonderful EXIF data that we sort of look at on our phones and our videos going, What is that? Well, this is an automatic form of structural or technical metadata that is very important for us. The file type, the file size, the creation dates. And then where a lot of people are finding great value in metadata is sort of the administrative side. What is the project number? What are the usage rights? What can I do? Did Lola sign a form? Is there a form that Lola is able to use to ensure that we are identifying this is the right doc at the right place at the right time? And for our organization and the content campaigns, what can we do with this and where can we take it? Because we've got administrative metadata associated with that image and that content. So that's the metadata side of it. It's the bits and the bobs. It's the ways we describe things. But then we think, well, what's the taxonomy side of it? Well, look at it. When you walk into a grocery store, many look like this. We have things organized in certain ways. We see the vegetables over here. We see the dairy over here. We see the meat over there. That's the taxonomy side of it. Taxonomy is basically just the science or the classification of groups or classes that share similar characteristics. So that's all it is. It's the way we organize things into categories. When we were in high school, really quickly, when we name things, make sure you name things the right way. Yes, this is curved yellow fruit. Absolutely, 100%. It's also known as a banana. Let's just maybe call it banana, but nonetheless, make sure when we were trying to identify things, we use the right terms to do it. When we were in high school, in our science class, we saw these types of examples of the taxonomy, large categorization at the top, working our way down into the bottom from the kingdom to the phylum, classes, and orders. In our work and all the content that we create, they do organize themselves really well around classes and sort of groupings. That's the difference. Metadata is the little bits and bobs that helps define how we do it. And the taxonomy are the ways that we sort of, the bigger classifications, the bigger categories of how we're organizing things. How does that work? Does that think that definition?
That answers all my questions about that, actually, because it's the is part, right? I think sometimes we get stuck trying to be explainers, and we, instead of explain what something is, we explain why you should want it. What is the ROI? And then we leave people in the dust. They're like, they just told us a million reasons we want this thing, but we have no idea what this thing is. So what does your company Salt Flats help people do briefly in this area? If you have a content hairball of some sort, and you know that you need some external help, what kinds of things could your company help an organization do?
Well, everyone loves a tagline. So the tagline that we use is that we make data work for you. And that's true because it's all about exploring how to work that data in different ways. Now, ultimately, we're at Salt Flats, we're a creative group of disruptors. We launch new ways of thinking and growing to create new value. And some of that value that we like to work with is sort of that data element. At Salt Flats, we are very big on being storytellers. We like to use design thinking methodologies. We like to employ the practice of collective intelligence, where we believe that the total of groups and the multiple of people in a room is much stronger than the individual, in the sense that we want the diversity of opinion. We want the diversity of sales and marketing and IT and legal and operations. Bring all those people together and ask them good questions about your content and ask them good questions about the future, because with that collective intelligence, we are able to create new ideas, innovative ways of thinking, and new ways of looking at how your data can be used. When I say that metadata matters, it does because of what it is at this certain point in time, but what it can be going forward. And that sort of speaks to us in terms of data analytics and the ability to understand what we have and how it's being used, the frequency, the volume, and then again, that sort of North Star approach, looking off into the distance, saying, how well is it being used? What can we learn from the data that we've been receiving from the metadata, and think, what can we do with this now that we've learned new ideas? Maybe we can launch movies at a different time. Maybe we change the store hours because we're seeing where customers go in and out. There are so many things to be pulled from the data itself. And that's what excites us, is thinking differently about the future.
Can you give us some examples that you discovered when I was reading your book to write a jacket blurb for you? I was interested in how often you were able to pull in current examples of how metadata could be used to impact or help us act as a detective in some cases and find things that maybe people don't think we should be able to find. And also to help us with kind of pop culture things. For example, right now we talk a lot about inclusive language, and metadata can help us with that. But could you give us a couple of examples of ways that metadata impact us every day that we may just be unaware of?
Is this a good time for a poll, Scott? Or do we want to, should we do
a
it?
poll? Yeah.
I love polls. I think you love polls too.
I do too. Let's do one real quick.
I think we should. I hope
All
the
right,
audience also enjoys doing a poll as much as we do.
Yeah, well, they're going to see on the bottom of their screen, they're going to be encouraged to take a poll. And if you have, you may have taken it already. In fact, we launched it a few minutes ago. The question is, do you have a formal metadata strategy? And John, can you see the numbers on your screen?
I can.
The third button down.
can.
All right, talk to us about what you think these results mean.
First and foremost, let's. I always want to say thank you very much for anyone doing a poll. That's about you. This is great. 15%, yes, and we use it always. Hello, thank you. You're 50%. I love that. Yes, but we sometimes use it. 32%. That's good. That's a strong number. That's better than it would be. So that's I'm very positive to see that. I'm not sure. The 11% of you think, I think we might. Let's see. I should probably ask someone else to see if we know that. That's good. And then 42%, no, we don't. Let's hope the no, we don't becomes a, I think we should going forward. I can tell you that you probably should have a formal metadata strategy, or at least some type of metadata component. Excellent feedback. This is encouraging to see. I like the fact that there are people using it, but there's that still a component of people thinking, not sure, but I think we might want to go that place. So I do love that. Well done, everybody.
There is a question it was a comment more than a question that came in from somebody who said, hey, good show. I'm new to metadata and I'm trying to understand it. Sometimes we get, I think we get bogged down. I'm going to be saying John and I and other people who might serve as counselors for people trying to help them understand what metadata is. Often we're hired to help them do metadata for publishing. We're trying to help them accomplish something else faster, better, cheaper, speedier, personalized, whatever. But we're doing something with information. But that information is there whether we plan for it or not. Aren't there opportunities where metadata crops up where you might not expect it? I think you had some great examples of people who had created documents who didn't understand metadata and later tried to tell some fibs about that content. Can you give us some examples of how metadata can bite you in the ass? Is basically
let's yes, it can bite you in that. Even simplistically, when we use our Word documents and our PowerPoints and whatever sort of formalized programs we use on our computers every day, our names are being attached to all these things. So behind the scenes in our preferences, it will say your name. It will say the dates that you've updated and edited documents. So if you ever think no one's watching, they're absolutely watching, because it's all part of the behind the scenes. And what this book is trying to do is trying to bring metadata from what it was, is sort of, again, that sort of, is it the matrix? Is it something I don't understand? I'm trying to bring it to the forefront to say it's all around us. And there, as Scott was saying, there's many great examples of how metadata has been used as something, as a documentary evidence of what has been happening. The NSA, Security Alliance, was sort of, has found with phones uses and emails that things are being tracked. There are many examples of where security issues might have been breached, where people's emails were being used, and people didn't realize that people could track their emails going forward. That's something that again, it happens in the background, but we want to be cognizant of the fact that it's actually happening in front of us. Edward Snowden, another example of someone who is able to say, wait a minute, our emails are being used. We're being tracked in certain things at a certain time. We may not think it's happening, but it definitely is happening. When you go into social platforms and you are looking at sort of the ads that are appearing, when you see those ads appear, that is not by coincidence, because it's seen what you've done on maybe on a search engine looking for a holiday destination or a certain type of restaurant. Well, those ads are going to start appearing because it's tracking you. It's watching the metadata that you are using in terms of your search terms. Those are definitely being watched and then being repeated back to you in different ways. So metadata matters because it's happening around us. It may be behind the scenes, but I'm trying to allow people to realize that it's there, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are being tracked.
I think you also had some really great examples that were timely. For example, one of the hot topics today is inclusive language and trying to make sure that we use the right language when it's appropriate, right? So we're after appropriateness is really what we're after.
Right.
How does metadata help a company be able to move toward providing appropriate content?
Perfect. I'm going to use a few fun slides here. So let's talk about some products. I'm a big fun slide fan. And the slide comes up.
It is loading. There we go. Cookies.
Here we go. Language and meaning. What is this? I say it's a cookie. Some people say it was a biscuit. Some people would say it's a bicky or a cookie, depending on what it is. But what is this? And why does it matter? Well, it matters because who is my audience and who am I serving these cookies for? If you make cookies as a company, you want to be very mindful of who this sort of demographic is and where they sit in the world. Very similarly, chips and crisps. I say chips. Here we are. I live in North America. That's a thing. But if you live in the UK, you live somewhere else, it's known as something different. So you got to be mindful of where you are, where your audience is, and making sure you understand who they are. But let's talk about music and the whole idea of music classification. Let's talk about what is hip hop versus pop, which is another genre in itself. And music identification, in fact, is one of the greatest challenges in terms of metadata because of rights assignment to ensure that we are looking for the right person. But is it the right song? Is it a sample? Is it a song sung by somebody else? So many issues around a symphonic music and orchestral sort of classification. Is it a certain symphony at a certain time? Is it a certain orchestra at a certain time? Finding music is actually a challenge. And it is something that many people actually are studying in more detail so that we allow music discovery to happen in a better sort of way. But to speak to what Scott was saying, we have great examples in our society of cultural ways of being more inclusive over time. We used to say, and the winner is. We don't say that anymore at the Oscars because, well, everyone's a winner. So there was a decision to be made to say, and the Oscar goes to. It's more inclusive. Everyone's a winner. Everyone gets a sort of recognition today, but the Oscar, the single prize, goes to one person. In our society, we have seen terms change as a matter of stigma. At one point in time, we used to say VD or venereal disease. That then changed to sexually transmitted disease. And now we use the term STI or sexually transmitted infection. Why? The stigma associated with the word disease was harsh and unfair and unkind. And by just making that switch, it allowed a change. It was reflective of what was going around us in society. And it was something that metadata is very much a part of because it's all about language. And the one we are definitely seeing in the last few years is the whole idea of identity and the inflection of words like cisgender and trans. These are words, some of these only popped up in the last 7 or 8 years in academia. It has now come back over into popular discourse. But it's important because we in society, we're changing. Our language changes all the time. And right. When those changes happen, we, with working with metadata, have to be reflective of those changes. We have to be aware of those changes and start using terms that are more inclusive as we go forward. Now, if you don't have mechanisms in place to talk about it, you might make mistakes by keep on using out-of-date terms. And thank goodness, metadata is there to help us to ensure we can do our part to be more inclusive along the way.
And it's not about inclusivity as much as it is about appropriateness. Like we're trying to deliver the right piece of content to the right person in the right situation.
Correct.
And so if you're concerned about the language that you use, you can use taxonomy, if I'm understanding correctly, and the metadata that powers it to help you assure that you will be less likely to deliver information that they do not desire.
Correct.
By paying attention to who you're speaking to, why you're trying to talk to them, what is the intent of the communication. And by encoding all of this in the metadata, we can give our computer systems the power to automatically serve up the right piece of information. But how does a company get started? There are so many people on this call today. There were like 400 people who signed up to today's show. And not all of them actually have a metadata strategy, or they kind of sort of do. But what would you give them advice on how to get started the right way so they don't end up in a metadata mess?
Well, first of all, thank you for using the word metadata mess. I think that's a different, that's a great idea for a new webinar down the road. How does one get started? Well, first of all, you're doing the first right step by being a part of this discussion today with Scott and I, and just talking about it, because what's the best way to learn about something is to start talking about it. And that's the first step. But what can you do? So yes, you have content. Everyone on this call is working with content in some way. It might be, again, with images. It could be with videos. It could be with products. It could be with services. We're all working with something here. But okay, so there's this metadata. How do I get started? There are a few things that you can start doing immediately. The first thing is look into yourselves and say, what do I have? How much do I have of the content? Where is that content? Who owns this content? Is it me? Is it someone else? Should I even have this content? Why do you have it? When was it created, and what is it? That's sort of a content assessment. Some people say audit. I like the word assessment. It's a more positive term. That's a great place to start. The who, the where, the when, the why, and the how. Start looking at those, and then you can start seeing what you have. And then let's go that's looking inwards. If you look outwards, you want to identify, who is this for? Who is this content being used for? Who are my users? Where are my users? Are they in North America? Are they global? Again, the chips versus the crisps. Jumper being a sweater, jumper being someone who just jumps. Where are my users? It's a regional? Is it global? What are they doing? Listen to your users, talk to them. When you're working with content management systems, whether it's the web, a CMS, social media, a digital asset management system, you have users using systems to manage the content. What are they saying? Can they find what they're looking for? Are they able to identify what those issues are? Talk to the people who create the content. Go talk to them. Do they know what they're making and what it's being used for and where it's supposed to go? And then in terms of just keep up to date. One thing we do know, we know that language changes. New words are being added. Over 1,000 neologisms every year are being added to our language.
Do you think that when we start down this road, we inadvertently sometimes cocoon ourselves in our own vocabulary because we're familiar with our turf, and then we go down the street in a different department at the same global enterprise, and we're shocked to know that that's not what they call this. They don't call it that. They call it something totally different. And so meanwhile, the sales team is calling it one thing, the training team is calling it something else, marketing is calling something. Is it possible to bring these different terminology bases together in some kind of meaningful way so that we don't end up with this giant content metadata hairball? Because I think that the worst part about it is if there's so many options of what you can call something, and it's okay to call something more than one thing. For example, I ran into it was a French Canadian versus American English differences in the word associated with napkin, right? Napkin versus serviette. And I purchased from a store that has bilingual product labels. And so I always see the Spanish and the French, right? Whenever they choose to include that. But that's because they're putting both or all of the words on the package so they can just be inclusive, right? But what happens when I need to manage and make sure that the word that needs to go to the Quebecois person, that would be serviette, will not be napkin? How do we manage? Can we manage multiple taxonomies, or is it multiple sets of metadata? What are we actually managing?
Yeah. Well, and to your original question, Scott, can we bring sort of harmony to this? Yes, we can. And how do we do that? It's through good governance. Now, governance is a term that many people go, "Ooh, governance." No, governance is good. The ability to administer rules and regulations and practices on how we manage our content is a good thing. And we can bring harmony to those types of things. And yes, there are instances where different words are being used for potentially the same thing. A very common one in business, Scott, is I say PowerPoint, you say slide deck. They're actually the same thing. However, if they're being codified or tagged potentially as one but not the other, so let's say all the content was being tagged as PowerPoints. A salesperson goes into a content system looking for it, but he, she, they is thinking, oh, I use slide decks. They put in slide deck, but they can't find it because the content has been tagged in a different way. This happens all the time. We use multiple words for the same thing. but how do we get the right word? And then if you even want to go to a global context, what do you do when someone's saying boot, 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 and I'm saying, I thought it was the trunk of the car. Oh, same thing, different language. Again, jumper, sweater, chips, crisps, these things exist. But with good governance, we can bring harmony. And how do you do that? We ask ourselves many questions. We know that the user needs and the business changes over time, the language changes, but bring the people together and talk about the content you have and find harmony. Yes, there might be a preferred term. We might say, in this organization and for these purposes, we do want to say the word slide deck, and here are the reasons why. So that is our preferred term. However, these are multiple ways to say the same thing. We might use those as synonyms in maybe our search opportunities for the content systems we have, so we can still find things. So yes, bring your people together, your content users, your creators, bring those people together and start having these sort of design thinking, collective intelligence sessions with them to say, how do we say it? How do you say it? How do we change this? If words have changed over time, how do we reflect that in society? Good example is organizations used to call things as watches, but as with time and with new technologies, certain things were called wearables. What's a wearable? Well, it's the same thing, but it's just, it could go on your hand, it could go on your foot, it could be something attached to your hat when you jog, but you have to change the term to reflect it. So with good governance, people identified that the public was saying one thing through social media and purchasing habits on Amazon or sort of other big organizations where you were looking at how content was being served. That was fed back into the organization to make a change in the product name itself. So with good governance, anyone is able to take a look at the content you have and start saying, can we make it, is it the right one? Are we saying the right words? And if not, let's identify the opportunity to use the right word. Perhaps over time, maybe the meaning has changed in good ways or bad ways or other. Maybe we need to identify those terms that are inappropriate and don't make sense anymore because they cause confusion. So let's make sure that we're allowing those opportunities with good governance to make good changes so people can find the right thing at the right time for the right person. So yes, good governance is one mechanism, Scott, that is allowing for good change over time. Does that make sense?
It does. And John, when an organization has a metadata strategy, but the people who are victimized by it, if you will, don't have everything they need. In other words, it needs improved. Where can they start when the company knows they need this, but they need to be kind of fixing it up? Where are the most common errors that we make when we start a metadata strategy?
Oh, it's interesting to flip it as where's the errors that happen. Many people go too fast, too quick without thinking of the what they're trying to do. It's that whole the biting the world at the big two sort of advantage. Start small. Find a category of information, find a product category, find a class of content that you were thinking about, and work on that. So don't go too fast, too big, too soon. Find something small and figure that out and see how that sort of works. And then expand that to other parts of your organization, content classes, product lines, service lines, and then roll that out in a gradual format. My biggest advice when I see people do things is they go so fast and they want to sort of solve all the problems at once. It's a lot to ask for. Language is a big thing. The way we use our content, the way we apply metadata to these terms, it's complex. So let's go small. Let's start small and then get that working and then build that out over time. So move small and methodically as well.
Excellent advice, and probably for almost any show we would do on this. On this channel, start small. Don't try to boil the ocean. Excuse me. I'm sorry for coughing. Let me throw a few things at you. The audience members are definitely generous with their questions. If you'd like to ask a question, in fact, you can do so using the Ask a Question tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Clicking it will open a little text-based window into which you can text your question. Here's a question from a viewer that says, what if your Fortune 100 company does not even accept the very concept of using metadata and tagging and doesn't see the necessity? What should we do?
In fact, that's something that is actually quite common, is what are we doing? We don't need this. What are you talking about? This is an opportunity. First of all, great question, whoever you are. Great question. This is an opportunity to use the terms and the techniques of socialization and education. This is an opportunity to educate your organization as to why it is important. I have been brought in many times over the years to do certain exercises like that. And it's easy as making the content known and finding those examples, whether it's an ROI example, which is return on investment, or just the justifications for why content is so important for your organization. A few sort of easy things to do to help generate that discussion is go to your CMO, your chief marketing officer, your CDO, chief digital officer, anyone sort of at the C-suite, or even just anyone at that sort of an executive or senior level, is say, what if we couldn't find our content? How would you respond? That's a big question. Do you know where your content is? Sounds fun. It's actually one of the most challenging questions to answer. And it's good that people might respond with, good question. I actually don't know. I think it's over there in the J drive, isn't it? Oh, it's not? Yikes. So actually, where is that content? These are good sort of opportunities to socialize and start educating people about metadata. Because if you can't find the content, that's actual ROI. There is time and money invested in the content that we've created. If we can't find it, that's wasting hours, potentially days, weeks. I've seen it where people couldn't even find the content. It was somewhere else entirely. It was a third-party agency that held the content. So these types of questions are provoking in a positive way, but it starts the discussion to say, hey, it is important because we do need it so we can find it, we can use it, and then we can get it back out into the hands of the customers or the services that we are offering in an organization. My best advice for that is start the discussion. Metadata 101, a few slides to sort of identifying what we make in our company, if it's products or services, and the what if statements. What if we couldn't find your stuff? What if the movie's about to release, but we couldn't find the trailer for some reason, or it was in a different language? Those are the aha or the yikes moments that we do want our executives to respond to. And then it's those types of discussions you can say, let's talk about a metadata strategy, because our content is that important and it is that valuable and it's worthy of your attention and all our attention in an organization to ensure that we're using it in the right way. That's a great question. Like that.
How about deciding when a term is maybe outdated or needs to be worked on or replaced or deprecated? I'm not sure what we'd like to say there, but when do you decide to use a more inclusive or a different term? And if so, what does that mean for your metadata strategy? What do you have to change in order for the system to know, hey, we're making a change, we're going to use this word differently?
Absolutely. So first of all, as I said earlier, with that good governance mechanism, you can, with governance being running in the background, and governance can be something as easy as once a month, twice a quarter. Again, the mechanism to allow people to come together to talk about your content. Is it out of date? Is it damaging? Has the meaning changed over time? Is it a new product? Is the new product's name changed? What you can do is within a system, if the word has been changed, if the terminology has been changed, make the change, but then socialize it. Tell people, tell your content creators, tell your content owners, tell your users that the words have changed and here's why, so that they don't make mistakes. And you can codify this in the content management systems that you're using, because you can remove the term through good administrative rules. You remove the term, add the new one, but then add notes saying, we used to call it this, but now we're calling it this. And if you still want to use that term, we're going to keep it up for 6 months as a synonym potentially, so you can still find it. But after that date, that's been removed, because we don't want workarounds and we want to educate our organization to start using those new terms. So there's many different ways to play with it, but there are administrative or sort of governance ways to make it in the big change and socialize it. But then there are technical decisions as well to make the change in the content. Even with the XML or the XMP associated with the asset itself, you can make that change so that it is part of the asset going forward. But again, this goes back to good governance and why we do need to always look.
And leaders want to make sure that they are being good stewards of the expenses, right, that they approve, because they're basically hired to manage the corporation's assets. And that includes money, time, people, resources of all kinds. And it wouldn't be surprising that a leader who uses mathematics and science to decide whether or not something's successful might come to you with these kinds of questions like, is it possible that you could measure your taxonomy success? And if so, how do you know if our metadata strategy is meeting its business goals? Is that something that you might get called on the floor to answer sometimes? How will you talk to a leader about this, and what do you want to explain to them so that you're not doing the generic metadata dance? Instead, you're saying, here's actually how successful we are being with our content since we've invested in metadata and governance.
Absolutely. In one way, have you been sued lately? You don't want to be sued. There are many examples, unfortunately, where people have used the wrong logo. Looked the same, looked right. People went to the internet, right-click, yeah, that's our logo. No, it wasn't, and they got sued. So there are many bad examples of these types of situations. So you don't want to be sued, but you don't want to sort of lead the conversation with, when was the last time we were sued in this company? But yeah, there are tangible ways to start measuring the effectiveness of your metadata over time. ROI, the return on investment. Are people able to say quantitatively and qualitatively, I'm finding my content faster and easier with better use of metadata? That's something you can qualify, quantify, and show back and say, hey, we are far more productive. We were able to generate more content, even new content, because we had better organization of our content with better metadata associated with it. So yes, these are things that one can do qualitatively and quantitatively in terms of search mechanisms, the ability to find and create new assets. These are calculated. You can find the times. There are many instances with good metadata we've seen, drops down by hours and days. What we used to take weeks to create a campaign might take days now because metadata has been able to help us find our assets and reuse them. So there are mechanisms to do this. You do need to step back and sort of say, how do I do that within my organization? There's many differences in terms of what does success mean for our organization. Is it tangible? Is it intangible? Is it quantitative or qualitative? But yes, Scott, there are definite ways that we are able to qualify and quantify by using metadata as a metric for the success of our campaigns. Good question.
Here's some more questions from a viewer. How can you best prove to an organization that foundational taxonomy work deserves time, attention, and resources? I mean, we know it, but we don't have to be convinced.
Great question again. It's not magic. People think that these types of things, they just sort of happen. Metadata can be magical, but it does demand resources in order to do it. And that's people, process, and technology to make it work. And one of the biggest things we always sort of confront is, how do we get that buy-in from our executives and our leaders to say, oh, this is valuable. This does need funding. Again, it goes back to that socialization and educational exercise that at some point, you and others in your organization do need to go to your leadership team and say, here is why it's important. Because again, it's loss of time. It is the loss of the assets or the content itself because you can't find it because the metadata wasn't there. Everyone looks bad in that situation. And what you want to do, you're being preventative and proactive to your leadership by saying, with an effective metadata strategy, we can find our content, we can use our content much more effectively than if we didn't have the metadata. Because the metadata gives us the proof, the future proofing to use our content in the way it is should be used. I like to use the term future proofing because it's a safeguard. It allows us to know that busier times are coming, much more complex times are coming in terms of distribution channels and where our content can be used and how it can be used. But with good metadata, you're able to future-proof your content to enable it to be used in those different ways. So it goes back to socialization, it goes back to education, making some of these arguments, but it is that important and it can be done.
Well, and if you use the word, if you step back for a second, you take the enablement word out for a second, then you'll know that that's about building capabilities, which is what we started talking about at the beginning of the show. Are we capable? Are we able? Are we enabling our company to be able to do X, Y, and Z? And I think if you can start making your messages more about the labor that I want to put into our content is going to give us a capability that we do not have today. For example, the sponsors of today's show, Zoom In, they want to help companies bring all of their technical content together in one place so that a customer is capable of finding the information they need, but only the information they need for the product they actually bought in the language they actually speak, in the country in which they really actually live, so that the contract and the language that's used is actually, relevant to their culture.
Mm-hmm.
All those things can be controlled by metadata and taxonomy. But do you think that we get too caught up in the weeds because we're content people, so we start talking about content problems instead of leadership problems?
Yeah, I think we do sometimes, absolutely, because we play with it every day. we're right there in the weeds looking at the metadata pieces. But we do with good governance again, and I want to go back to that word. If you go back to governance and as a mechanism to socialize and to educate and communicate the goodness of what you're doing with metadata, so it can go up in the chain, and then executives and people who are making sort of other sort of strategic decisions, they can see the effectiveness at a certain point in time. A good example of this, and I want to share a slide with everyone here, is, let's see if we can bring it up. It is the artificial intelligence discussion, AI. Many organizations are now, 5 years ago, it was more science fiction than fiction, but people are now doing this. So AI is a real thing. But guess what? In order to do AI, you need the data to feed the robots. The robots don't know what they're doing. So when people are sort of thinking about how can I do this, I hear about AI and I want to start using it. Yes, but you need data as a foundation to help the AI engines going. You need the robots to have good words, good languages going forward. But you also need the people part of it. So to go back, Scott, what you were saying, it does need people power sometimes. Metadata is a human endeavor. You need people behind the scenes to ensure that the technology is doing the things that we were able to do. And that's a long-term approach.
I was just jumping in here to say, I think what you're getting at there is that, yes, there's the possibility of using automation to tag things, but in order for a machine machine learning, which is a part of artificial intelligence, to function, machines first have to be taught, just like humans, right? In order to learn something, you have to be taught that thing. So we need to be using metadata, if I'm correct, to teach our systems the things about the content that we're going to need in order to make the rules that we want to govern, so that the content can be delivered to the right person or the right machine or the right place in the Internet of Things, wherever you're trying to push the content, without having all this human involvement every 10 seconds.
Absolutely. It's the good data. The robots, the machines that are looking for that learning, they want good data. So let's give them good data. Where does that good data come from? Authentic, authoritative, controlled good words that are coming in with the metadata that we use. So we want that approach. But again, some people, in an earlier question, people jump so fast and like, let's do AI. It sounds like a great thing to do. Yes, it is a great thing to do, but slow down. Make sure you have a good data foundation. Are you using good quality words? And do you have the mechanisms in place behind the scenes with good governance to allow the terms to be changed over time and to allow the machines to learn by providing them accurate, authoritative, controlled, good content that speaks to what you're trying to do, so the machines will learn the right way over time. It's all about
what was the most interesting thing about writing a book about metadata? I have found in the past that when I try to put my ideas into book format, it changes the way that I perceive the topic. I may come at it with a particular vantage point when I think I'm going to write a book, but then I start actually doing it and I have aha moments about what's missing in the way I explain it. Maybe a reviewer says, wait, what if you switch it around and explain it this way? Did you have some aha moments when you were writing the book about how we can explain metadata better? And is that why you wrote the book? Tell us a little bit about that.
One of the good aha moments is that, and we talked about this at the beginning of our conversation, was that it is around us. It's all around us. It's not just what we do at work, but it is everywhere we go. When you get your iPhone or any other mobile device and you're looking at how you sort of assemble your musical playlists, you create terms and you create a playlist name. These are all pieces of metadata that means something to us. And one of the aha moments for me was that metadata matters beyond just what we do in business. It matters in all the personal things we do as well. The way we organize the content on any of our streaming devices for what we were watching for movies or television or other things, it touches us. And when the research I was doing in terms of things like the NSA and Snowden and other individuals who have been, what they've done with email and other sort of documentary records, it does affect us personally. And a big aha moment for me was that it's beyond business. It's touching each and every one of us. When we use browsing mechanisms and search terms and they're being brought back to use with the ads that are sort of targeted towards us, those are all metadata. But here we go. We need to think carefully about this and just make sure we're prepared for it. And definitely, last year, a very large social organization changed their name to Meta. I don't think that's by accident. I don't think one of the biggest words right now is the metaverse that we're going into and that organizations want us to go into. Meta is all about the aboutness of something. And I think that as we in society are becoming more reflective and responsive and inclusive, the aboutness of who we are and the aboutness of the content we serve is a good thing. I think meta as a term is something that's becoming more and more part of vernacular. No pun intended.
Well, I know we're going to have you back to talk a little bit more about that, because you and I could go on about this for a long time. But I appreciate you making time for us today and narrowing down the subject. Definitely, everyone check out his new book, Metadata Matters. You can Google it and find all the places online where you can pick up a copy, including your usual online booksellers. Excuse me, John. Thanks for making time to be on our show today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
While you're saying thank you, I'm going to show our audience some winners. We actually are going to give away a couple of complimentary copies of Metadata Matters. The first winner is Jason Enegia, product taxonomist. I'm sorry if I mashed up your name there. Product taxonomist at Best Buy. You're one of our winners. You'll receive a complimentary copy of John's book, Metadata Matters. We'll send you some information about how to claim that. Also, Nicholas Hung, who's a UX researcher at Macy's. You'll also get a free copy of the book. And last but not least, Jared Miller, who's the media manager of the Wall Street Journal. You'll also receive a copy of the book. Keep your email open in order to be alerted on how to claim that. And for future shows, we'd like to look in your email inbox. We'll alert you to the next episode of the Content Advantage Show, which takes place on Tuesday, March the 8th, when I interview Michael Smith, the CEO of Zia. We're going to talk about whether manufacturers should measure technical content performance using revenue KPIs. And we're going to examine what would be possible if we stopped looking at post-sales content, things like technical documentation, as a cost center, and instead started using it to drive sales of parts and services. And what would that mean for companies that have lots of technical documentation that could actually impact sales? So join us for an open discussion about the pros and cons of measuring after sales content with revenue KPIs that are typically tied to sales and marketing activities. It's going to be an interesting conversation, and I hope that you'll be able to join us. Also, before you sign off today, at the bottom of your webinar viewing panel, there is a Rate This tab, where you can give us a 1 through 5 star rating and letting John know what you thought about the quality of his contribution today to today's show. Please feel free to use the text box provided to leave a comment or suggest a topic for a future episode of the show. I know that John loves to get constructive feedback and hear from the viewers, so please don't be shy on the way out the door. Do that. You've been watching the Content Advantage talk show about why metadata and taxonomy matter with John Horodyski from Salt Flats. We've been talking about the role of metadata in the development of new business capabilities. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. It's been recorded, so shortly after we sign off, the link that you're using to watch today's live program will feature a recording of today's show that you can watch on demand or share with others. On behalf of myself, Scott Abel, the Content Wrangler, and our sponsor, Zoom Software, I'd like to thank you for making time to watch our show today. We hope you'll join us for an upcoming episode of the Content Advantage. Until then, be safe, be well, and keep doing great work. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.
Thanks, John. Thanks, audience members. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.